Okay, welcome back, everyone. Season 2. We are now into episode 7 of the Human Roll. So, as I mentioned on our last episode, I have a very, very big guest, Professor Joe O'Mahony. He knows all things in the consulting industry. He's a professor of consulting. He's an award-winning published author, and I'm really happy to have him on here to just discuss the AI functionality that's going to happen in our industry. Professor Joe O'Mahony, thanks so much for joining us today. We're really happy to have you here.
It's a real pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. And I was saying to my wife this morning, I could do with a bit more energy, and I'm even getting that through the screen from you. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm really excited to have you. I know my network is really just all into this topic. Last year, when I did my first episode on AI, it was really, really a big deal. So I know they'll be really, really happy to kind of just hear an expert's insight on this. But before we get into questions that I was really curious about, Professor Joe O'Mahony, I'm just curious on, if you want to give my network a formal introduction of yourself. That way you can let them know your full background, your history. I'm sure many will probably be reaching out to you after they see this with, questions, insights, and maybe potentially wanting to figure out how to work with you. So happy to give you that floor now.
Thank you. So my name's Joe. I'm based in the UK. I previously, before coming to academia, I was a corporate consultant, an independent consultant. I ran a team of internal consultants, and then eventually I started my own company that I grew and sold. And since 2005, I've been really splitting two things. One is as a professor of consultancy. Now, in the UK and Europe generally, it's a slightly different system to the US in that it takes 10, 15 years to become a professor in something. And I'm not necessarily someone you would invite to dinner, but I know a lot about the consulting industry. That's pretty much all I know about. So I write, teach, and research about management consultancy, specifically boutique consulting firms and how they grow. And then the other half of my time, I consult to the consulting industry. I've got a group of about 30 CEOs, and we have kind of a mastermind network, and we support each other in our growth plans. And so that's what takes up my time. I've always been interested in tech. So the company I ran was in tech, and my background was in consulting tech. I'm not a coder or anything, but I have a great excitement for new technology and its potential. And so about 4 or 5 years ago, I started getting into the AI scene and really exploring what was out there, what was working, what wasn't. And then, of course, generative AI had these big launches with the large language models. And I'm writing a book at the moment on use of AI in professional service firms, including consultancies, but also how it's likely to impact, because we're obviously right at the beginning of a very interesting journey. What may happen in 5 years is going to be quite different to what's happening now, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for that history. I'm excited to read your book once that comes out. And I know my team, anyone that's been connecting with me lately, a lot of people are really interested in this route. So definitely we'll be happy to kind of punt them over to you, especially once we launch this episode. But that does get us into our first question. 5 years from now, right? Of course, things are going to be different. So just for everyone out there, these are just opinions, what has been researched up to this point. It could be different from what we're talking about now, a couple of months or years from now. But I wanted to get your opinion on how you think AI is really going to affect like the landscape of professional services, in the consulting world. From my end, from what I've seen so far, is that it seems like it's just going to automate a lot of like mundane tasks. So tasks that I have maybe spent 30 hours doing within a week might only now take 10 to 15 hours, right? And so how do you foresee through your research and things that you've come across that having AI is going to really kind of like impact our world?
Obviously, this is a crystal ball question, and I predicted many things wrong. I predicted Brexit wrong. I predicted Trump wrong. So, take what I'm going to say with a pinch of salt. However, with this type of tech, what tends to happen is that people tend to overestimate the impact in the short term and underestimate the impact in the long term. And certainly the two big waves that I was involved with as a consultant, number one was sort of e-business, and the second was mobile phones and digital media on mobile phones. And in the short term, it was all very clunky. You're probably too young to remember this, but it was all pretty awful in the 1990s, but has transformed the way we shop, the way we live, the way we communicate, the way we think. And I think the same thing is going to happen with AI. I think AI is another one of these transformative technologies, perhaps much more so than e-business and digital media. And it helps to have a shift of thinking from sort of short term, where, quite right, I think, we're talking about automation here. But I think in the longer term, we're talking about business model transformation. Interestingly, I would say less so, or perhaps later, in the consulting industry than any other industry. The reason for that, I would say, is that management science is way behind any other form of science. So the failure rates of management interventions or management consultants are very high. And the reason for that is that organizations are highly complex, highly varied, and highly contingent on what is happening in the context at that time in the world. Unlike the human body, unlike law, which are relatively codified, standardized pieces of sort of entities that you can predict, if I give this drug to someone, or if there is a vote, the law will change in this way, or bodies will change in that way. Organizations are much more complex, and that partly explains why consultancy interventions have such high failure rates, but also why I think AI is going to impact consultancy advice slower than perhaps other professional service firms. So that's a high level view. So I do think there will be transformation. I think short term, we're talking about automation. Longer term, I think we're talking about more business model innovation and transformation for consultancies, especially in the reduction of people at the bottom of the organization. I think the leverage model will probably eventually go out the window when you have agents talking to each other intelligently. But how far away that is dependent on not just things that we don't know, but things that nobody knows. The interesting thing about AI is that nobody knows when it will achieve something. So nobody knew that it was going to speak French all of a sudden. Nobody knew that it was going to code at a certain time, which makes it very different to normal software trajectories.
Yeah, no, a good call out, because that's the scary part, right? Just the unknown. Most people want to kind of know what is happening, and even the creators of it are just. I think I've seen a couple of panels where they're like, "Look, we could be creating something great. We could be creating something terrible." It's really a trial and error run that we're all kind of dealing with. So I've been kind of just communicating to my network, like, you can't run from it. It's here, right? Just like when the internet came, when phones came, I'm sure, when ebooks came, the libraries are probably worried about it. It's just one of those things where we all have to kind of just evolve with it, which leads into my next inquiry around ethical considerations. So we're talking about companies who are trying to implement AI to kind of help, with best practices, or to maybe help save, budgets financially for, lower level people that are, kind of doing some of the smaller tasks. I've seen a couple of lawsuits come up where, like, whether the company has knowingly or unknowingly kind of implemented something that has excluded some type of age range or has excluded some type of race. I've seen that kind of like come about. So those are big heavy hitters that we need to kind of consider, especially from like a lawsuit perspective. What are some other top like ethical considerations that you think companies should really consider when they're like leveraging AI technology? Are there specific ways to prevent that, or you really still need that human there? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
This is a huge topic. And yeah, you're completely right. There's obviously large language models learns from what is out there, and all the biases about what is out there are going to be inherent in that model. To counteract that, obviously, Google, Facebook, Meta, all the rest of it, they've put in guardrails. Now, sometimes those guardrails actually have the opposite effect and make the LLM more biased against other groups. For example, Google's Gemini put in such strong guardrails, it was starting to discriminate against the white race and men because it was overemphasizing hallucinating what was happening. So I guess that's one thing, and that's going to get better as time goes on. All of this is only 3 years old, and you're already seeing a lot of work on fine tuning AI models so that they have less inherent discrimination and don't reproduce the discriminations of what they've learned. But I won't go into the technical details, but it's actually quite a complicated process, and it's all but impossible to remove that bias completely, because it's in effect it's a black box that you're dealing with, and you can't put guardrails in for every situation. The second thing is this issue of hallucinations, which again is getting better. Hallucination rates improve with every model that's released. So GPT 4.5 and GPT 4 Turbo have much lower hallucinations than GPT 3 or 2.5. And so that's getting less and less. But it becomes a problem when a doctor or a lawyer or a professor are using it for advice and it has made up that advice. And so then you're getting into professional territory and what it means to be a professional and an expert. I've spent 20 years studying the consulting industry, so I get to call myself professor. But if all of a sudden I choose some shortcuts and start to rely on the answers of an LLM, there's a problem there. And the final big one, there's lots of smaller ones. Well, in fact, I'll mention two. The penultimate big one is decision making. AI is already being delegated to make decisions around various things. And increasingly, those things are going to encroach upon healthcare and various things like that, being used in the military, etc. And there's a question there, the extent to which AI should be used. And the final thing is security. It's interesting, the research I've done shows that 2/3 of consultants are using AI, but 2/3 of them haven't told their employers that they're using it. So when you ask employers, is your firm using AI? They generally say no. About 50% of them say no. But actually they are, but they're just not telling their seniors. So what in effect you're getting is client data being fed into the algorithm. To all intents and purposes, that's not a significant risk in my view, but it's certainly something clients wouldn't be happy with. So I guess those are the big ethical concerns. You can obviously overcome that last one by having a locally hosted LLM where you don't upload data, you in effect share it on your own servers, but it's a lot more cumbersome to do that and not necessarily as fast.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say communication is a big thing, but I feel like it's scary for everybody. So companies, behind the scenes are probably nervous if they do tell their employees that they may try to leave or look for another job. They don't want to run anyone out. But when you're not communicating, especially with these younger generations, right, that's already just, you're losing their trust. I'd rather have a company maybe over communicate certain things on what they're trying and maybe even bring their employees in, because you still need that human aspect. I mean, I focus on that a lot on my first episode last year. There is still a human component. A conference that I was at the other day where there was a guest that stood up and said, we're all coders now. If you use this, like all of us are coders, because everything we basically are putting in has been being read by the AI functionality. And so it was just kind of funny when he started asking, hey, who's a coder here? And no one raised their hand. And then we're all coders. So he started showing us AI stuff. And he did actually show us how it translated in different languages. And so I had not even seen that or not even realized that that was a thing. But I think the more you include your employees, the more comfortable they feel, maybe something else will strike them. It's like, okay, hey, look, if my job is going to change, this can now be my new job. Helping them visualize what their job could potentially turn into would be really, really good. So next question I wanted to kind of get your insight on is really around any type of success stories you've seen, like with your clientele or with your network. I mean, from me, I really feel like it's solving the blank page issue where people are initially going and where you have to start a paper or something and you may not have any foundational basis. And I also feel like, it's going to help push people be more strategic, maybe some of the day-to-day that they're kind of like drawn into. It's going to hopefully help open everyone's eyes to a more heavier, larger role for them to start thinking more strategically. But curious on if you have any success stories on your end or anyone else's end that AI has really helped, their company with.
So at the moment, I'm studying all professional service firms, so accounting, architecture, marketing, all the rest of it. Consultancies are probably the furthest behind in terms of their use for the reasons I outlined earlier. What I'm seeing mostly is the use of a locally trained chatbot. So in effect, unless you're one of the big firms where you can train your own chatbot, like, McKinsey or Ernst & Young have done, what you're doing is getting something like ChatGPT-4, and you're using something called a RAG to augment that model, which is your own data. And in effect, you're getting a locally trained version based on your own data, and it can answer questions that perhaps your juniors would be pestering your seniors with. So all that stuff with, where do I find the templates for this, or how do we write a proposal for that? It can answer those types of questions, all the way down to HR policies. So that's number one. But the slightly more advanced version of that is when it is embedded into more of an enterprise system or a SaaS offering, perhaps even client facing, where it might draw on specific chat messages in a Slack program, or it might draw on specific project messages, and it can act as almost a central communicator and Q&A for that client project. And there's different versions of that. One is of course project-based. Another one is software-based, where you might have a SaaS offering and then you're adding in a chat bot so that people can ask and answer questions based around some of the content that might be used in the SaaS offering. When we get slightly different, you've obviously got the use of PowerPoint generators. I've tried 4 of them and I have found them all to be pretty weak. I believe Deloitte have their own version. In fact, I believe Ernst & Young, it might be Ernst & Young, are using Google Slides now, because the Google Suite, like the Microsoft Suite, now has AI embedded in it. So it can almost, it can take a Word document, turn it into a PowerPoint, or it can create a PowerPoint from a blog that you've written, or it can just create a PowerPoint from scratch. So there is that. I'm personally, I see the capability at the moment as almost like analyst level. So whenever I've used, the PowerPoint generator or the modeling generators or spreadsheet AI, it's what I would typically expect a decent analyst to do, but it certainly requires a senior to go back over it. And then there's quite a few examples like that. You can get I'm still talking about chatbots here. You can then get slightly more complicated, and you can, for example, use chatbots for specific tasks. So something that I'm doing with my students now is I do a lot of training on negotiation or client relationships or problem resolution. And the question is, well, how do you scale that? Because if I've got 300 students or 200 consultants to do that with, I can't do it with everyone. How do you scale it cheaply? Well, you train a chatbot to be the angry client or to be the tough negotiator. Now, the great thing is that you can stick an audio filter on the front of that. So instead of having a text conversation with an angry client, you can actually have the conversation. The latency's only really been good enough in the last 6 months for that to work properly. So there's lots of exciting things coming out. And obviously there's the video side of it for content generation, there's the image side of it for marketing or whatever. But what I'm seeing at the moment, especially in the consulting industry, is very much tasks. We're not really talking about the replacement of roles. We're talking about automation of specific tasks that then a human picks up at some point. The next stage is the agents. One thing people might not know about LLMs is that chatbots tend to be much more effective when they're trained for a specific task or personality type or whatever. So what you can have then is a series of what they call agents, so a series of personalities to run a project, and they communicate with each other. So for example, if you are having an e-business project, you might have an agent that's a project manager, you might have one that's a business analyst, you might have one that's a systems analyst, you might have one that's a coder, and so on. Then those agents start communicating with each other to run the whole project. And again, that functionality has been emergent over the last 6 months, but is getting pretty good.
Dropping some gems over there. I feel like I've asked with you already. I had no clue about some of the last ladder stuff you were speaking about, converting some of like the Word to the PowerPoint just yet. And I guess I'm just, I'm still using some things, obviously old school, old ways. So that's all really great things. I mean, I think it's great for everyone to kind of just hear what's coming and really try to focus on how you can best prepare yourself as much as possible. Obviously, the unknown is always going to be there, but it's really just kind of accepting it getting over being nervous about it and just trying to learn it. I just think just doing what you can to try to learn it and get as much insight about it, because then you're not so shocked. The rug may not be pulled up from beneath you if you kind of are a little bit up to speed on, certain things too. I think it's really good because I know there's some people that just want to pretend like it's not happening. No, it's here.
Almost every role or function you can think of, there will be 40 or 50 AI support mechanisms out there. Now, I started off a few years ago trying to review these, and I got up to about 200, and I just thought, I can't do this anymore because the numbers are increasing exponentially. But if you think specifically of the sales process, so every firm has a sales process. Every step of the sales process, identifying leads, creating content, outreach, having calls, having meetings, and then having the negotiation. For each one of those steps, there's around 10. So I've kind of broken the task down. There's around 10 AI tools that could be useful for you. I'll give you one simple example. I have no shares in the company, so don't worry. I'm not getting any cash out of it. But there's an app called Crystal Knows. And what Crystal Knows does, if Tiana's on LinkedIn and wants to find out about someone or has a call with someone, they can go to their LinkedIn profile. And from that person's LinkedIn profile, Crystal Knows will create a psychological profile of them. So in effect, using the DISC approach to personality testing. And that's based on that content the person puts out and how they respond to things. And then it will give you advice on how to contact them, how to write to them. And it can also edit your emails. And so I've only done the test version of this, but you start to write an email to the person, and Crystal Knows will interrupt you and say, actually, this person is much more forthright, very time conscious. You're much better off phrasing it this way. But that type of stuff, and there's hundreds of these types of unusual tools out there, are very powerful. But as I say, at the moment, it's very much focused on the task, not the role or the process.
I'm a little bit jealous. Why didn't I think about that? Why didn't I think about
I know.
something like that? I was like, come on,
Yeah.
right? You should. But no, that's great because you're right. It's just kind of scanning their page, and some people will see a long email and just immediately not even read it, But then some people, there's not enough detail, so it's just hard to determine. So look, you've already given a lot of great advice. Last thing I kind of wanted to head out with was curious on any other additional advice. I know we've gone through some of like the ethical components.
Sure. Yep.
Obviously, the last one you just mentioned with Crystal Knows too, but curious on anyone who is trying to figure out the power of AI, within their company. What other type of advice would you give to someone wanting to, start implementing this?
It depends where you're starting from, of course. There's an old joke about that, but it depends where you're starting from. And so what a lot of people have done, they kind of played with ChatGPT-3 a long time ago, thought it wasn't very good and haven't touched it since. To those people, I would say go and mess around pay for the subscription. It's only $20 a month, either with Claude 3, which I personally now think is better than GPT-4. Go and have a play with them. And when you're stuck for ideas, or you've got a proposal that you've half written, or you've got a blog that you want finishing, put it in there. Be intelligent with your prompting. I think you don't need to be a prompt engineer or any of this nonsense that's out there at the moment, but actually getting intelligent with your prompting in terms of specifying what role you want the AI to play, who the audience are, what good looks like, perhaps even upload some of your own documents so that you can get an idea of your style, and then be very specific about the outcomes and tasks that you want it to do. If you just do that, you're going to get much, much better outputs than anything else. So that's the first thing. That's kind of simple. If you've kind of played with it, you might be thinking about specific tasks within your organization. In that case, I would recommend going to product or follow me on LinkedIn, because I post every time I find something interesting, I post it. Or go to Product Hunt and just search AI sales or AI personality testing or AI recruitment. And Product Hunt is a website where users feedback on what works and what doesn't. And then for that task, you might experiment with 2 or 3 things, and you might think, oh, none of these are actually very good. Or you might think, this is going to really enhance our sales process. The next stage, so once you've looked at the task, is to think more about the enterprise or the process. And there, you've really got to do as you would do with any other IT project, to really give some thought about what are our priorities? What does good look like? What are the business objectives of this? It's beyond playing. AI and software development, as you'll know, is a very, very easy way for consultancies to burn through money. So just because you've got a brilliant idea that you've had in the bath or the shower doesn't mean that it's not going to cost you 2 million in 5 years to do it. Before you start coding things yourselves or hiring a firm in Poland or India to do it for you, I would very much ask people who know about how a software business is different to a consultancy business. There's a lot of innovation out there to be had, but that doesn't mean the consultants are the right people to do it.
It's expensive. I looked up some numbers and then the years it takes. I think I looked up EY, and I mean, it took them probably a good decade or so to kind of get their whole team together and kind of figure out things. And it is very, very expensive to implement all of that and just make sure you get it right and have the right people. And then hallucinations is a really big thing. I continue to hear that over and over, but it does help when you're stuck in the middle of something. I mean, I've tried it out. At one point, I was very scared to even try it out. And then, within seconds, it'll just pop up a bunch of things. And I'm like, oh my goodness, okay. And then if I had half of the sheet filled out, then I just asked it, one question, it actually would check off okay, our things would be aligned. And then sometimes it would give me something else that I just didn't even think about. So it's a good tool, it's definitely a great tool to use. It's just, we've got to be somewhat careful depending on how much we're using it for.
Based on what you've just said, which I agree with completely, I would just add one extra hint or tip there, and that is to think very widely about the content that you've created. Podcasts, what you're doing now, are a brilliant training material for AI. So if you wanted to create a Tiana chatbot that you could give to your clients or whatever, or you could use yourself, podcasts, webinars, anything you've written, plow it in there. It will learn your style. It will learn your expertise. Record, obviously, using confidentiality and all the rest of it. Record any meetings that you can have, because we talk so fast and there's so much expertise coming out of our mouth that gets lost in the air. Increasingly, we're going to need to capture that, because that's valuable information. So don't underestimate the amount of information or data that you've got that you could put into a chatbot and then allow other people to extract wisdom from that.
Okay, alrighty, there you go, another gem. This is why I was really excited to tape today. This is great. Thank you so much, Professor O'Mahony. I really appreciate you being on. That definitely sums it up for me today. I'm definitely looking forward to what's to come for AI for my whole network. Please, as he mentioned, follow him on LinkedIn. I can guarantee you he posts great content all throughout the day. Sometimes because of the time difference, I wake up in the morning and he has a long post and I'm reading through it before I'm out of bed. So it's really, really great content there. I know you guys will get a lot of good insight from him. Hoping we can continue to stay connected that way. Maybe we do a follow-up in 6 months or so from now, especially when your book comes out. I'd be really, really excited to post about it and share that with my network. So to all of you listening in, thanks so much for joining again to episode 7. Upcoming episode, I'm going to give a brief overview of WOTC, Work Opportunity Tax Credit for Companies. And then following after that, I'm going to have another special guest on about neuroflexible workplace. So that's going to be a really, really intense one to talk about, as some companies are requiring their employees to be back in the office. So really, I'm looking forward to that. But thank you so much again, Professor Joe O'Mahony. Really appreciate you being on, and have a great rest of your evening. We'll make sure we have everyone tune in, start following you, and he will be attached to this post as well. So feel free to just click on his name and start to follow him and reach out to him if you need anything.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.